are glad that you were able to join us this morning. We do have a lot of material to cover today. Emily and I will be presenting the material, and Melanie and Leanne are here to answer your questions. Therefore, we're going to have to ask you today to use the Q&A box to ask your questions. If we cover some material and you have some questions about it, or you have any general financial aid questions, please feel free to put that in the Q&A box, and Leanne and Melanie will respond. We will try to save some time at the end for a few questions, but we have lots and lots of material to cover. So we appreciate you being here today. This is being recorded, and it will be loaded up onto the OASFAA Counselor Resource page. So if you have any colleagues who couldn't be here today and need to listen to the presentation, it will be there for them. At this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Emily Goldman, who's going to cover the first portion of the webinar. I'll be back in the middle of the webinar, and then Emily will finish up. So again, thank you for attending today, and please make sure to put your questions in the Q&A box. Emily.
Thanks, Morley. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Just a quick information about OASFAA and this presentation. So OASFAA is a nonprofit organization comprised of financial aid professionals. The presentation today is brought to you by the Outreach Committee. We're an all-volunteer committee that serves our high school and college high school counselors, access advisors, TRIO, and admission staff. So we want to make sure that you have the information so you can provide the best service to your families and students. So this presentation is free for all of you today, and you have the ability to copy and distribute these materials to your students and families. We just ask that no charges be assessed for these materials, and if you're going to use them for some other purpose, if you could just reach out to us at outreach@oasfa.org. All right, today's agenda, we're going to talk about FAFSA by the numbers. We'll talk about highlights for 26-27, the new changes. We'll talk about the Federal Student Aid ID, or the FSA ID, dependency status, unique student situations, which we know everyone's got a handful of those in your for your students, so let's talk about those. FAFSA contributors or the parent of record. We're going to do a walkthrough of the 26-27 FAFSA. We'll talk about the FAFSA submission summary. We'll talk about federal aid programs and Ohio aid programs. We'll talk about financial aid notifications. And finally, we'll highlight some OASFAA resources for you. All right, let's talk about FAFSA by the numbers. All right, so we are up for FAFSA completion this year compared to 2024. We have had some rocky years for the FAFSA. We've had a lot of changes over the last couple of years. This year, things seem to stabilize, and we're seeing an increase in the number of students completing the FAFSA, and we're seeing some year-over-year change in FAFSA completions as well. So that's some good news for us. All right, let's talk about where we are in Ohio. So we were able to pull these numbers as of September 19th. The FAFSA did open up just a few days prior to October 1st, so hopefully we'll see even more changes in Ohio. Currently, we're sitting at number 34. We've got 53.2% completion and a year-over-year change of 11.5%. But Ohio does rank 44th in year-over-year change, so we've got some work to do. All right, what do those numbers mean? So as of that September 19th date, nationally, the class of 2025 is up 14.6% compared to the class of 2024. Every state has had an increase this year. That is great to see. In Ohio, the class of 2025 is up 11.5% as compared to 2024. Last year, we were down compared to the class of 2023. Again, we were the 34 highest completion rate in the country. And last year at this time, we were ranked 19th in the country. So we have had a drop off. We do have a lot of work to do. The increase is good news, but we were not able to bounce back as much as other states. And unfortunately, the state does not have any FAFSA completion dollars this year to help in those efforts. All right, let's talk about some highlights for 26-27. All right. So the FAFSA will open for all by October 1st. And actually, for the first time ever, it opened early. So it opened just a few days prior to October 1st. The Department of Education did do beta testing in 2 phases that began in early August and saw some good progress. And they actually had some boots on the ground working with some local school districts and community-based agencies to make sure that things are moving smoothly. Beta testing for the second phase began in late August, and that opened up completion availability to any student in the country. The FSA IDs, if you haven't started that campaign for your students, now that the FAFSA is open, we want to make sure that those are completed before you get started with the FAFSA. And then again, we always need to encourage our students to check those FAFSA priority deadline dates at colleges. We do have a survey that we did through OASFAA for all of the Ohio colleges, and that information is available on our website. All right, some changes this year. So there is an updated contributor invitation process, and it actually made it easier this year for our students and families. So dependent students only need to identify and invite one parent, and they only need the parent's email address to invite that parent contributor. So they no longer need a list of identifying information for that parent. So they're not going to ask for birth date and social security number and all that good stuff anymore. So we're looking at just looking at the parent's email address. Um, the parent will also receive a one-time non-case sensitive code that they will use to log into their studentaid.gov account to accept the invite and go ahead and complete their portion of the FAFSA. We are very thankful that this change happened. We did see some barriers with needing all of that information. And so just having the email address seems to make things a little smoother for FAFSA completion. When the invited contributor signs in, they'll just enter their information and the system's going to determine whether or not another contributor is needed. So if our parents are married filing jointly, they're only going to need to enter the birth date of their spouse. No invite will be needed for that. And then the simplified process is available when the student starts the FAFSA. So again, we encourage the student to start the FAFSA and then invite the parent. If the parent starts the FAFSA and invites the student, they're going to have to follow the existing 25-26 process to invite their student and complete the FAFSA, which is a little more cumbersome. All right, some demographic changes. There's a single question on what the student's sex is, and the options will be male and female. And then the student race and ethnicity questions, the categories are now listed alphabetically. There are some changes for what assets are excluded from the SAI, and those are not going to be reported on the FAFSA. So the net worth of a family-owned business with 100 or fewer full-time equivalent employees, those assets will no longer be included. The net worth of a farm in which the family resides, and then the net worth of any commercial fishing business or related expenses owned and controlled by a family. Those are no longer assets included on the FAFSA. Some other changes, the word legal has been removed from the state of residence question, and there are some new instructions related to the legal residence and the date definition for all of those contributors. There's going to be additional guidance to the amount of college grants, scholarships, or AmeriCorps benefits reported as income to the IRS. We saw a lot of uh, uh, issues with this question. A lot of folks uh, that said that they had received these grants and scholarships that were incorrect. So there is some additional guidance. So again, we want to use that little eye icon on the FAFSA to make sure that we're including the things that the FAFSA is asking for. And also students who qualify for the minimum Pell Grant but have an SAI more than twice the maximum Pell Grant are no longer going to receive the minimum Pell Grant any longer. So again, the 25-26 Pell Grant amount was $73.95. So if you multiply that by 2, anybody with an SAI more than that will no longer be eligible for that minimum Pell Grant. All right, some clarifications and updates to questions to reduce errors that we saw in the 25-26 FAFSA. The high school information question to identify none of the previous has been clarified. And then the federal benefits received section. So the free or reduced price lunch question, students and families should only select that if the families meet the USD requirements for income, rather than if the student's school or district offers free or reduced price lunch to all students. All right, FAFSA processing. The confirmation page will include text indicating that it'll take time for students to receive the financial aid information from their selected colleges. So again, that takes, once the colleges receive the FAFSAs, each institution kind of has its own timeline of when they will start sending out information to students. Once the FAFSA is processed, the student's going to receive an email letting them know. Again, applications should be processed within 1 to 3 days, and then they'll be forwarded to state agencies and colleges. We already are seeing 26-27 FAFSAs coming in. The FAFSA submission summaries will be available immediately upon processing. And again, those are going to be available on the student login, not the parent login. And then corrections should also be available immediately after processing. And then any FAFSA started in the system will not be deleted. There was a concept of a 45-day clock, and that concept has been removed. So FAFSA submissions will not be deleted. All right, let's talk about the Federal Student Aid ID, or the FSA ID. All right, some new good information here. So we have real-time identity verification. So students who create that studentaid.gov account that have a social security number, those accounts will be verified immediately instead of having the 1 to 3 day waiting period. So that means those students can go ahead, create that studentaid.gov account and get started with the FAFSA that allows for immediate reporting of tax information from the IRS. They no longer have to have that waiting period. Users who do not have a social security number will need to continue to follow the existing identity validation process. All right, so how to create an FSA ID. You'll need your social security number, date of birth, and the name must match on the social security card. So this is the time that you get that card out and make sure that everything matches. And then you'll go ahead and you're going to create a username and a password. Again, that username cannot include the applicant name or date of birth, and it can't be something that's been used from a previous applicant. You got to create a password. Again, we're all used to using usernames and passwords and just making sure that we keep that information uh, safe. And then you will also do a mobile phone account recovery. So you're going to want to provide a mobile phone number. Again, that's going to have to be unique to the FSA ID. So we can't use the mobile number for more than one FSA ID. This is going to help you regain access if the account is locked out, and will also be used in a two-step verification. So every time you log in, you go through the two-step verification process. You will create challenge questions and answers. Again, we always ask that you have answers that are that you're going to remember, and just know that the answer you provide is not case sensitive. Okay, you will complete account verification. You can do that either through your mobile phone and receive that 6-digit secure code. You can verify it through your email address. Again, you will receive an email with a 6-digit secure code to complete that process, or you can set up a separate authentication app. That's optional, but it is an option as well. All right, let's talk about dependency status. All right, not a lot of changes with dependency status, but it's very important that everyone is clear on who needs to be included on the FAFSA. So a dependent is a student and means a student and parents must complete the sections of the FAFSA. An independent is a student, and if they have a spouse, if they're married, will apply for the FAFSA without parents. And then the categories below are used to classify dependent versus independent students. Most of our high school students will be considered dependent and will need parent information on the FAFSA. All right. When we're looking at dependency status, we're looking first age. If they are the age 24 as of July 1st of the filing year, they will be considered an independent student. This is not upon turning 24 within the year. They have to be age 24 as of January 1st. If the student is going to be a graduate student at the beginning of the academic year, so they'll be looking at post-bac programs. If the student is married, if this changes within the academic year, within the FAFSA year, the marital status change is going to be determined by the school of whether or not the student needs to go in and change their FAFSA. If the student is active duty or a veteran, and this would be something beyond training, and the reserves and National Guard status are not included in this. If the student has dependents, so they have children or other people other than a spouse who they live with and who they support and provide more than half of their support during the academic year, they would be considered an independent student. All right, if the student is an orphan or ward of the court, so as of the age of 13, they don't have a biological or adoptive parent, or they are a ward of the court or in foster care, or if they are an emancipated minor or in a legal guardianship. So again, this would be an emancipated minor as determined by a court or in legal guardianship. And again, legal guardianship and legal custody, especially in Ohio, are two very separate things. And so the student would have to have court documentation of a legal guardianship to be considered an independent student. A student will also be asked if they are homeless or at risk of being homeless. So they would be unaccompanied and homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. And to be determined homeless or at risk of being homeless, that would be determined either by an emergency or transitional shelter, a high school or district liaison, the director of a TRIO or Gear Up program, or it also could be determined by a financial aid administrator. So the order of the questions for dependency status. So the birth date, year in college, and marital status are all collected on the FAFSA prior to the student personal circumstances. The remaining items of the dependency status questions will be in that student personal circumstances section, and the student may check if they apply to any of those items. And if they answered yes to any of the questions in the personal circumstances section, they will complete the FAFSA as an independent student. If none apply in the personal circumstances section, the student will be asked about other circumstances, and they'll be asked about homelessness or their risk of homelessness. And if yes, if the student answers yes to the homelessness question, they're going to complete the FAFSA as provisionally independent. So again, they'll be able to move through the FAFSA and complete it without parent information. If no, that the student will be asked if they are able to provide parent information or if they have an unusual circumstance preventing them from contact with their parents, or if it puts them at risk to do so. All right, colleges have the right and will ask for supporting documentation for dependency categories. We are required to reach out in cases of all provisional independent statuses. So those students that are have answered yes to the homelessness questions or have an unusual circumstances, we're going to ask for information and supporting documentation. Those provisional independent status will calculate an SAI, but the student's not going to be eligible for any aid until it's resolved by the college. So again, we'll review and determine the student's dependency status for those students. And then once independent, the student's going to be anticipated to remain so throughout their time at college. So future FAFSAs will keep those answers and limit the need to redocument in the future. But also because we anticipate them to remain independent, we may ask for more documentation at the beginning so we don't have to redocument throughout their time at school. All right, let's talk about some unique student situations. Unfortunately, we know we have students at every school. Every year you're going to work with a student who may fall under one of these situations. So the first one is parent refusal. So if a parent is unwilling to provide their information for the FAFSA, but there's no unusual circumstance, so the student's not at risk um, um, of abandonment or violence or things like that, the student can request to be considered for limited federal aid. So this would be a federal unsubsidized loan, and it would be up to the dependent loan limits. Again, it would be just an unsubsidized loan, regardless of what the student may have been eligible for. No SAI is going to be calculated. We're going to ask for documentation from the school again, so we can help determine what the situation is. And then we may work with students to help alert parents that dependency status does not obligate them as a way to get FAFSA completed for maybe more eligibility for a student. So, what's the difference between unusual and special circumstances? So, those unusual circumstances, so that would be for a student if contacting a parent is not possible or could cause them harm. So, examples if there is an abusive situation or abandonment, um, or the student does not know where the parents are, they're going to answer yes on the FAFSA. And this has been known in the past as our dependency appeal or an override. So now we call those the unusual circumstances versus our special circumstances question. So this would be a significant change in the student's or parent's finances. And this is where the family would ask for an adjustment to either the cost of attendance or their student aid index. Both the unusual and special circumstances are professional judgments. Those are going to be exercised on a case-by-case basis and determined by the financial aid administrators at each school. The outcomes could differ from school to school, and the documentation to support these circumstances will be requested, and it also may be slightly different from school to school. So again, the unusual circumstances, these circumstances allow for a student to apply for financial aid without their parents' information. This would be if a student is not able to contact their parents, or it could cause harm if they were to contact their parents. So if a student is in one of these situations, abuse, abandonment, estrangement, incarceration, um, if they're a refugee or asylee, separation, human trafficking, or they just don't know where their parent is. In these cases, the student may answer yes on the FAFSA and move forward through the FAFSA without parent information. Again, our special circumstances, this is for students or families that have a change in the FAFSA that is different from the information that they're going to be providing. So again, they're going to be asked for their tax information from 2024, and they're going to if there has been a change, then they will speak to the financial aid office at each of the schools and talk about what their special circumstances is, whether it's a job loss or some other situation that has come up that doesn't match the information they provided on their FAFSA. They could request an adjustment to either the cost of attendance or that student aid index. Again, that would be after the FAFSA is filed, that they would contact the financial aid office. All right, let's talk about FAFSA contributors. Who do we need to include on the FAFSA? So a contributor is any person that's required to provide information on a student's FAFSA. The student is always going to be required to put their information on their FAFSA. Again, this is their application requesting federal aid. Um, a parent or parents for dependent students will be required to provide information on the FAFSA. A spouse for buried students will be included. A step parent, if applicable, may be required. And then another parent, maybe those adoptive parents would be included as a contributor. The student can invite in contributors to the FAFSA by email. No longer they're going to ask for additional information. It would just be an email. And while the parent may begin the FAFSA, again, we encourage the student to start and invite the contributor. It makes that process a little easier. Okay, so what do FAFSA contributors do? They provide private, financial and demographic information. They consent to have their federal tax information transferred from the IRS. They review and sign their portion of the FAFSA. The contributors are not responsible for paying for college, but the number of contributors depend on the student's dependency and marital status. So not everybody has the same number of contributors. And then each contributor's timely completion is essential. The FAFSA cannot be processed until all contributors finish their sections. Okay, legal parent definition. Okay, again, the FAFSA defines the legal parent as the student's biological or adoptive parent. Step parents that have not adopted the student will be identified as the parent's spouse. In the case where the parent and step parent divorce or the biological parent is now deceased, the step parent is only considered the legal parent if they adopted the student. Those not considered parents on the FAFSA, so we don't include grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, widowed step parents, aunts, uncles, siblings, unless they have legally adopted the student. All right, how do we determine the parent contributor? So if the parents are married, both of the student's legal parents, birth or adopted, will provide information on the FAFSA. If the student's parents are unmarried and they're not living together, we're going to provide information for the parent who provided more support during the last 12 months, even if the student didn't live with them. If both parents provided an equal amount of financial support or don't support the student financially, the applicant should provide information for the parent with a greater income and assets. And if the divorced parent is remarried, determine which parent's information should be reported based on the guidance above and include the step parent's information. If the student's parents are unmarried and living together, you're going to include both students' legal parents. If the parent is widowed, you're going to include the student's surviving legal parent. There is a Who's My Parent Contributor wizard, and we always encourage families to use this if it's a situation where we're trying to determine who the parent is. So who should enter as a parent on the FAFSA form, and they can use this tool to determine who needs to contribute their information, and we encourage them to do this tool before starting the FAFSA. So the first example is the parents are married to each other. So they'll answer this question will help determine which tax information is needed to complete the FAFSA. And the student will include both parent one on the FAFSA form. The second example, the parents are unmarried and not living together and are remarried. So they're going to answer the following questions. So are parent 1 and 2 married to each other and not separated? So no. Do parent 1 and 2 live together? No, they don't live together. Which parent has provided more financial support for the student over the past 12 months? And we've selected parent 1. And did parent 1 remarry? Yes, they did. So who do we include? We're going to include parent 1 on the FAFSA form and parent 1's spouse. Information is also needed on the FAFSA form. All right. So I'm going to hand it over to Maura Lee, and she's going to walk through a question by question scenario for the FAFSA.
Thanks, Emily. Good morning, everyone. Just a reminder that if you have questions on the material we're presenting or general financial aid questions, please use the question and answer box. We've got a couple people, financial aid folks who are here and willing to answer all the questions that you have. So please feel free to type those in. The good news for those of you who may have helped students do the 25-26 FAFSA, the 26-27 FAFSA is really very, very similar. So I am going to run through these slides as quickly as I can. And if you have questions, like I said, please put them in the Q&A box. We're going to go through the scenario for a dependent student, since that's most common for our high school students. All right, this is what the landing page looks like this year. Obviously, for those folks getting ready to start the form, the student, they're going to click on that start a 26-27 form. But you'll notice the third button, the one where we've placed the blue star, Uh, we've talked a lot about the student having putting in an email and inviting the parent. So when the parent logs in with their FSA ID, if all they need to do is click on accept an invitation, and that's going to take them right into the FAFSA so that they can get their section completed. So that should kind of help direct folks who are accepting those invitations this year. Of course, the student's going to need to log in with their FSA ID information, their username and password. Then they're going to indicate who they are. So assuming the student logged in, they would be clicking the I am starting the form as a student. And then a information screen for their identity will pop up, and all the information that pops up here will be all the things that the student placed in their FSA ID. If there's something that needs updated, they can't update it on this screen. They would have to log back into their FSA ID and update any of the information there. It's then going to ask the student's state of residence. Emily mentioned before the word legal has been removed from that. That word was challenging to a lot of our folks, particularly the parents who may be currently undocumented. So FSA has removed legal there. So the student would put in their state of residence. In Ohio, we have a 12-month residency requirement. So hopefully they've been here more than 12 months. Of course, if they were born here, they're putting in the month and year they were born. Okay. And then comes the famous provide consent and approval. This is the critical step where the student, and this will happen again in the parent section, where they grant permission for the information, financial information, to be transferred over from the IRS if they filed taxes. They have to indicate and grant permission even if they didn't file, because the IRS will send over a confirmation that there's no tax return on file for that person. This screen is a long one, takes up a lot of space and a lot of words. But ultimately, what we want the student and the parent to get to is the very bottom of the screen and click on that approve button to allow the information to be transferred over from the IRS. And then once they do that, the student will see a message that their information is being transferred from the IRS into the form. If for some reason the IRS cannot transfer the information at the time, they would see this warning message that it could not be transferred. And that does mean if they see that, that the student or the parent, if it happens in the parent section, will be presented with all the FAFSA financial questions, and they'll just simply have to type the answers in manually. Then it moves into the personal circumstances pages. We talk to you. It's going to ask about the student's marital status. For most of our high school seniors, that's going to be single. If you do happen to have a married student, then they would be putting that in there. It's going to then ask what their plans are for enrolling in college. For all of our high school seniors, they should all check the first year box. I know we have a lot of students who participate in College Credit Plus and Amass College Credit, but for financial aid purposes and to be considered as an incoming freshman and be considered for all the funds that are available to freshmen, we always want our high school seniors to mark first year. And then the last question on this page says, will the student have their first bachelor's degree by the beginning of the 26-27 year? That should be a no for all of our high school seniors. Then the student personal circumstances, and Emily went through those. And so the student needs to read down through these. For many of our high school seniors, they're not going to apply being in the military, being an orphan or ward of the court, were they in foster care, an emancipated minor, were they in a legal guardianship? If none of these apply, then they'll check the box at the bottom. If you are assisting a student, though, who does meet one of these criteria, they should check it, and that is going to convert that student to an independent student, and they will not have to answer any parent questions on the form. There's the question regarding homelessness. We've covered that. So if the student is at risk or unaccompanied, they should mark yes. For this case, since we're doing a dependent student, the answer is no on this one. Here is the unusual circumstances question that students will be presented. And again, these are the dire situations where there is perhaps risk of harm to the student if they try to reach out to their parent, or if they're unable to contact their parent and they don't know where they are, then they might answer yes here. And again, same thing, they would become provisionally independent. The direct subsidized loan only question is the parent refusal question when the student is dependent and there aren't any unusual circumstances, but simply that the parents refuse to provide information on the FAFSA. The student would answer this question yes. This screen will pop up with it pre-populated as a no, which is the right answer for the majority of students who fill out this form. But if you are in a difficult situation where parents are refusing, clicking yes here would access that $5,500 student loan for an incoming freshman for the student, but they're probably going to have to provide documentation to the college prior to those funds being available. Then it's going to ask the demographic questions, and we addressed this. This was changed last February by an executive order. What is the student's sex? The only two options are male and female. Prefer not to answer was removed back in February and is not a choice for this particular question. Then we move into the students' race and ethnicity questions. It's important to let the students know that these questions are for research purposes only. They're not shared with anyone. It doesn't come out on the FAFSA submission summary. It's not sent to the colleges. It's not sent to the state agencies. In all the race and ethnicity questions, the student still has a choice of prefer not to answer. So they can provide the information or select the prefer not to answer. It's going to ask them about the citizenship. The majority of our students will be U.S. citizens. We may have lots of students who are eligible non-citizens. Those are our permanent residents, students who have green cards. Then it's going to ask about the parent education status. Either neither parent attended college or both parents have one or both parents have completed college. So the student should check the appropriate status there. Excuse me. Then it's going to ask if the student had a parent killed in the line of duty. The question will start off pre-answered no. If this does describe the situation for the student, they should change the question to yes. Please know the college will probably follow up with documentation because if students are in this situation, they may be Pell Grant eligible, even though their SAI may not indicate that. The student's high school completion status. For most of our students, it will be the high school diploma. We do have some folks who are getting GED or homeschooled, so they need to check the appropriate box there. Then it's time for the student to put in their high school information. This is critically important to counselors and those that have the ability to access the information from the Ohio FAFSA portal, where you can go in and take a look and get your lists of which students have or have not completed the FAFSA. So it's really critical that they make sure they choose the correct high school and confirm that so that they will come out on those lists that Ohio updates. As Emily mentioned before, the FAFSA has been open since before October 1, but with the federal government shut down, the data people who work in the Department of Education are currently furloughed, so they are not gathering any data and sending it to the state. So we anticipate seeing some data, hopefully within a week or two after the shutdown concludes and the data people are back at work and can pull that data and get it sent out to the state so that you can begin to track which of your students have done the form. Then it's going to ask the students some questions about their finances. It's going to ask them if they filed a tax return, yes or no. In this case, the student did. It's going to ask what their tax return information was, what their filing status was. In this case, the student filed as a single, which would be common for the majority of our students. And then it's going to ask about income earned from work. You're seeing all these questions here just so that you can see the list and the type of information that is being transferred over from the IRS. Once the student granted permission back on the consent page, all this information would be sort of transferred behind the scenes and into the FAFSA. But if you do have a student that has to answer all of the financial questions, you can see here, it's asking about income tax paid and did they have an earned income credit? Did they have a net profit or loss? from Schedule 1040. So these are very specific, and it gives line references on the tax returns. This is probably more common that occasionally the parent section will have to have all the answers manually. That's why it's great if you're hosting a FAFSA event, tell the parents to make sure and students to bring their tax forms, because if they do have to type anything manually, each question references the line on the tax return they would be entering. Um, the assets page, the student's going to be asked about the amount in their cash savings and checking accounts. They're going to be asking about the net worth of investments or real estate, and then business and farms. As Emily pointed out, there are some new exemptions. We are back to not having to report small businesses with less than 100 employees, or a family farm, or a family-owned fishing business. Will not have to be reported on the FAFSA, even if assets are asked. Then it's important for the student to get all the schools in there where they'd like the FAFSA to be sent. Online, they can have up to 20 colleges. So they would be going through, putting in their state and selecting the colleges where those states reside, and then double check their list before they continue, so that all the correct schools, if they think they're applying to somewhere and they haven't done the application yet, it's okay to put that school on the FAFSA. And then they'll take a look at their list, make sure everything is correct. And then it will be time at the end of the parent section to invite the contributor. So the dependent student will be inviting one parent into the form. They will be putting in the parent's email address, right? And clicking to send the invite. And there will be an invitation link and an access code sent to that parent, who can then click on that when they receive the email and jump right into the FAFSA with that code and complete their section of the form. And so, the student can constantly monitor the status of the invite that was sent, and the student will always have on their dashboard the invite code that is not case sensitive. So keeping track of that invite code is important. If a second parent information is needed, the first parent will invite the second parent into the form. At that point in time, the student will be finished with their section. They have the chance to hit the down arrow here and review all the answers that they submitted, and they can continue on through. And then it is time for them to sign their section again, a long page with a lot of information. But ideally, they get to the bottom of the page, they will check the box that they agree to the terms and conditions on the FAFSA, and they will click sign. Please note, we're doing something where a student started it and the button says sign. So they are signing their portion of the form, and it's the information, though, is not submitted yet because we still have a parent section that needs to be completed. They'll get this confirmation page that they have a pending submission, and it will show them again here that the invite was sent. And if they discover maybe they've invited the wrong parent, you can see they have a button there that says manage invitations. They can change who they invited to the form if they need to. Okay, so we can assume the invitation went to the right parent, and now we're going to do the parent section of the form. This is a sample of the email that they received. You can see the large invite code up there at the top. That is the critical code they'll need to be matched to their student's form. And then they can, in a sense, you see the button on the left-hand side to accept the invitation. They click on that. It's going to take them right into the FAFSA. They'll log in and be ready to complete their section of the form. They'll put in their FSA ID username and password, just like the students do. And they will accept the invitation, click on submit, and they are ready to go in their section of the form. And just some information that they'll see on their screen by accepting this invitation to Alex's FAFSA. You agree to share your information, click accept, and it's time to load information into the form. The parent will also see their information from their FSA ID appear on the screen. Again, nothing can be changed here. If something needs updated, it has to be done inside the FSA ID. So this is all the demographic information about the parent. It goes right into consent for the parent. Again, the long page of information that we're wanting to get to the bottom and have the parent click approve so that all the information can come over from the IRS or verification that there isn't a tax return on file. Just a reminder that if the student or the parent would click decline for granting consent multiple times throughout the form, they're going to see a message that lets them know that they're not eligible for any federal student aid by declining. So, we need 100% of everybody who completes a FAFSA to click approve, both the student and their contributor. Then it's going to ask a few questions about parent demographics. It's going to ask the parent marital status, single, meaning never married. Are they unmarried and living together? Are they married, remarried, separated, divorced? For this scenario, we have married parents. It's going to ask the state of legal residence for the parents. But again, the word legal has been removed. So the parent's going to put in their state of residence and the month and year they became a resident of the state. Again, same thing. If they were born there, will be the month and year that they were born. Then it's going to move into the financial section for the parents. There are a few more questions that parents will have that students won't see. But again, you know, in the background, because they granted consent, all their information is coming over from the IRS. It is going to ask about any federal benefits received. We've got earned income credits, housing assistance, Medicaid, SNAP, SSI, TANF, all those kind of things. The free and reduced lunch program is here. Just a reminder that our students should only select the free and reduced lunch program if they financially qualify for it. If they happen to live in a city or a school district or a state that provides free and reduced lunch for every student in the district, every student in the state, the family needs to financially qualify for the program before they check this box. It's going to ask about their tax filing status. Did they file a 2024 tax return? And did you file it with your current spouse? Some folks, depending on timing, may have changed who they're married to between when they filed taxes. So they need to make sure that they're bringing over the IRS form with the right people's information on it. It is going to ask about family size, the number of exemptions, et cetera, that were claimed on the tax return is going to come over and load into the screen to let you know what the current family size is. If for some reason the number of exemptions on the tax return is not accurate, then they are going to want to use this screen and they're going to want to include additional people who may live in the household and being supported by the parents, but for some reason were not claimed as exemptions on the tax forms. Probably the most common scenario here may be in the case of a divorce where a divorce decree may indicate that alternating years, different parents claim the students on the tax returns and things like that. So if the number is not accurate, it needs to be updated on the family size page. There is the question about how many people in that family will be in college during the 26-27 year. For the student or any of their siblings. You don't include parents here on this question. Please note that this is no longer taken into consideration for calculating the SEI, but there are colleges that take a look at this information and may adjust the packaging strategy if a family does have more than one student in college. Then they certainly are going to be asked, their tax filing status. So in this case, we have married, filing jointly. And then you're going to start to see the individual financial questions that people need to answer here about filing certain schedules, that amount of grant scholarships and AmeriCorps benefits, foreign income exclusion. So these are going to be presented to everyone, and they're going to need to answer these questions. And then the asset questions will only appear for families that need to answer them. The adjusted gross income level are families with $60,000 or higher or filed certain schedules, which was on that previous question. So if they meet the requirement to have to file assets, then this screen will appear. If they do not meet the requirement, they will not see this screen because they're not required to provide any information about assets. So any child support they received, cash savings and checking, net worth of investments in business, and the business and farm, again, the same exemptions apply here. Small businesses, less than 100 employees, don't have to be reported. Family farms or family fishery businesses. In this case, we had married filing jointly, so we don't need to invite the other parent, but the parent who is in there completing the form does need to provide the date of birth for their spouse. There is a calculation in the SAI that needs to know the age of the older parent, so that's why that question is there. The parents are then done with their section. They can review, hit the down arrows, review everything that was in their section, and then it is time for them to move on and sign the form. And again, a long page for them. Once they do sign and submit, they will get a confirmation page that lets them know that their section of the form is completed, and the student will get an email letting them know that their entire FAFSA has been completed and submitted. Now, the FAFSA submission summary is the document students receive when they submit their FAFSA. So they will get an email notification pretty quick, 24 to 48 hours, that their FAFSA has been processed. There'll be a link for them to click on and take a look at this FAFSA submission summary. Please note in the upper right-hand corner, there's a print FAFSA submission summary. Many of our students have to print this document. It may be something that needs to be attached to a scholarship application that they're completing, or if they work with a college access organization who may collect this information for all the students who complete a FAFSA. So there is an option to print the whole document right at the top of it. It's going to show them their estimated aid for the year, federal aid. This will not have anything to do with the actual institutions that'll be submitting award letters to the students. It will provide their student aid index. In this case, it was a negative 1,500. You know, SAIs can range from negative 1,500 up to 9,999,000. So, but our students with negative 1,500 up to 0 will be the students who are eligible for a full Pell Grant. And then they can review all their answers. And please note, kind of on the right-hand side there near the top, make a correction. If they are reviewing their FAFSA submission summary and they see an error, there is a button right there to make a correction. So they can log in and fix whatever they see that may be an error. And then, of course, it'll contain the information about the colleges that they listed, graduation rates, retention rates, etc. And then next steps. This will be maybe the most important page that'll let them know if there's anything special that they need to do. It'll let them know, for example, on this page, if they were selected for verification, etc. So the next steps page is pretty critical. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Emily, who's going to talk to you about federal aid programs and resources and award letters. So Emily, it's all you.
Thanks, Morley. All right, guys, we're in the back half of the presentation. Just a reminder, use that question and answer feature if you do have questions along the way. So let's talk about our federal aid programs. All right, so we'll be talking about Pell Grant and Teach, our campus-based programs, and direct loans. All right, so Pell Grant. So for the 25-26 award year, the maximum was $73.95 for the maximum Pell Grant award. If it was me as a betting person, I would anticipate flat funding for 26-27. Again, we won't know those numbers until sometime in the spring. So the amount received depends on the student's SAI, the institution's cost of attendance, and the student's enrollment status. So depending on how many credit hours they're taking will determine their Pell Grant award. Students have a maximum number of terms they can receive the Pell Grant. It's 600%. This is an annual award amount, or the equivalent of 12 full-time semesters. Students can attend on a year-round basis and receive up to 150% of their annual award. So we do see students utilizing their Pell Grant in the summer, which is a great way to move forward and tick off classes to maybe get things finished a little faster. All right, for the Teach Grant for 25-26, the maximum was $4,000. This is reduced by 5.7%, which ends up being $228. It's a grant of up to $37.72 per year to students who attend to teach in a public or private elementary or secondary school that serves students from low-income families. This is a grant that's prorated again on based on enrollment status. And there is a service requirement that is attached to the Teach Grant. So upon graduation, it must be met, or the grant becomes a federal direct unsubsidized loan that must be repaid, and the interest does accrue on that. So just make sure a lot of incoming freshmen aren't awarded the Teach Grant up front. This is usually for students in their sophomore or higher years. All right, let's talk about our campus-based programs. And I just want to talk about our priority deadlines again. Students want to be aware because many institutions use their priority deadlines to award our campus-based program funds. It is a limited number of funds, and institutions create their own awarding criteria for these. The first is the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or FSEOG. This is offered to undergraduate students with exceptional financial need. So a student with a negative SAI could be considered needier than a student with a zero SAI for purposes of awarding FSEOG. Awards range from $100 to $4,000 depending on when the student applies, financial need, and the funding policies of the school attending. The other campus-based program is the Federal Work-Study Program. So undergraduate and graduate students are eligible. Employment can be on or off campus. Federal work-study wages are excluded from the SAI calculation, so they're not going to be penalized when they fill out the FAFSA. They will receive at least a minimum wage. In Ohio, the minimum wage this year is $10.70 an hour. Some institutions may pay more than that. There is a difference between work study or work or employment aid on an offer letter. So you just want to be sure that the student is aware of the differences. Um, uh, if they are being offered work study, or it is just work or employment that a student has on their own. Interest in work study question was removed from the FAFSA a couple years ago, and so institutions may use another method of uh, of collecting interest for students. And then federal work study earnings can be paid via paycheck or direct deposit. Many institutions do this. It could be directly applied to the student's bill. The student just needs to be aware of how they will be paid. And especially if it's listed on the student's award notification, they want to make sure that they can account for those funds. All right, direct loans. So subsidized and unsubsidized loans. This has not changed for 26-27. Our subsidized loans are need-based, and our unsubsidized are not need-based, and that's going to be based on the student's SAI and the cost of attendance at the institution on the amount that the student will be receiving. The interest rate for 25-26 was 6.39%. And there is a loan fee of 1.05%. And so that means a student will um, borrow the loan, but have a loan fee. And so what nets into them will be smaller. Again, those interest rates are calculated and they come out in July 1st. So we will determine what the interest rate will look like in July 1st. All right, no changes to the annual loan limits. Students earn eligibility as they as they earn credit in school. So our freshman students, the maximum amount of subsidized loan that they could earn would be $3,500. They are eligible for an additional $2,000 for unsubsidized loans. So the most that they can borrow as a freshman in direct loans would be $5,500, and then goes all the way up to $7,500 for our students who are considered juniors and seniors. Undergraduate independent students whose parents who have been denied for the PLUS loan are eligible for additional unsubsidized loans, $4,000 for freshmen and sophomores and $5,000 for juniors and seniors. So again, no changes to our annual loan limits for um, uh, direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. All right, Federal Parent Plus Loan. This is a loan to parents and guardians of dependent students. The loan limit is up to the cost of attendance, less any financial aid. However, there is an annual limit of $20,000 in plus loan per student starting in 26-27 with a maximum aggregate limit of $65,000 per student. So this is a change. So there is a limit on how much parents can borrow each year and an aggregate on for each student. The interest rate for 25-26 was 8.94%, and the loan fee, no change this year, 4.228%. Repayment does begin within 60 days of full disbursement. Payments may be deferred while the student is in school, so the student and parents just need to be aware of their repayment obligations. And FAFSA completion is required. So the Parent Plus loan is an additional application. Parents can apply directly on studentaid.gov, or the school may have an internal process as well. So they just need to determine what their next steps are if they're looking at the Parent Plus loan. All right, let's talk about our Ohio aid programs. All right, we have many aid programs. It is nice to see that Ohio is investing in higher education, and we are adding to our funding options every year. So we'll go into depth about each of these programs. So we'll just go ahead and move forward. For 25-26 for the Ohio College Opportunity Grant. This is Ohio's only need-based grant program. This is going to be based on their FAFSA SAI. The students to be eligible must be Ohio residents. They must be enrolled in an eligible degree granting program at an eligible institution, and their SAI must not exceed 3750, and they also must have a household income that does not exceed $96,000. Okay, grants. The amount of the grants for OCOG is determined by the institution type. So students attending a community college are not eligible for OCOG. Public regional campuses can have an award up to $265. Students attending a public four-year main campus can receive up to $4,000. Students at private nonprofit schools, the award can be up to $5,000. And if the students are attending a proprietary school, the award is $2,000. Again, we have the highered.ohio.gov website there. It is a great resource for you and for students and families to learn more about each of these programs. So I just wanted to shout that out as well. All right, the Governor's Merit Scholarship. This is an award up to $5,000 each year. It is renewable, so a student can receive it up to 4 years. Students must be Ohio residents. They'd be in the top 5% of the class as determined by the high school or charter school or their other secondary institution. They must complete the secondary education on time and enroll at a qualifying post-secondary institution. Some other state aid programs, we have Ohio War Orphans, Ohio Safety Officers, Ohio National Guard, and the Nurse Education Assistance Loan Program. We also have Choose Ohio First, Ohio Work Ready Grant, College Adoption Grant, and the Grow Your Own Teacher College Scholarship. Okay, so let's talk about these programs by the numbers. The Ohio Safety Officers College Memorial Fund covers 100% of tuition and fees at public colleges and $10,672 at private colleges. The Ohio National Guard, or ONG, covers 100% of instructional and general fee charges at public institution and an equivalent amount at private colleges after considering federal aid and Department of Defense funding. Ohio War Orphans covers 77% of tuition and general fees at public colleges and $6,330 at private colleges. NELP, or the Nursing Education Assistance Loan Program, is a loan forgiveness program. And depending on the type of program, you see the awards there. This can be a forgivable loan program if the student meets all of the requirements. Choose Ohio First and Ohio Work Ready. Those amounts are going to vary by institution. The College Adoption Grant provides a one-time $2,500 grant to students who were adopted. And the Grow Your Own Teacher scholarship provides up to $7,500 to cover costs included in an institution's published cost of attendance. All right, some additional requirements. So the following require additional action beyond filing the FAFSA. So choose Ohio First and Ohio Work Ready. You have to check with the institution for an application or if there's additional requirements. The safety officers, a student must submit eligibility documents to a college and university. And War Orphans, NELP, ONG, College Adoption, and the Grow Your Own Teacher Scholarship, you must complete a supplemental application. Again, all of those can be found on the state website. And then some programs do have a service or work component. ONG, you obviously must serve for the Ohio National Guard. NELP, we talked about, you have to complete 4 years of post-graduation employment in Ohio for that loan to be forgiven. And then the Grow Your Own Teacher, you must complete 4 years of employment at a partnering primary or secondary school. All right, so there's a full program listing and there's a QR code that you can scan to review all of Ohio's financial aid programs. Again, the state has a great website and gives all the information about what maybe additional documentation or applications would be needed for each award type. All right, let's talk about financial aid notifications. All right, financial aid offers. This is the document that outlines the amount and details of financial aid being offered to the student. It's provided by each post-secondary institution listed on the FAFSA that the student has been accepted to. It covers one academic year. So this is not going to cover their entire college career. This is going to be one academic year. And we ask that students carefully review the aid offer, decide what aid to accept, and then follow directions on the aid offer to inform the school's financial aid office. Some may be mailed, but most often they are now delivered electronically, either emailed or posted on a self-service portal. All right, students should be able to identify and consider the breakdown of annual cost. So this will be the individual cost of attendance components. So first of all, they want to look at their direct costs. Those things are billed by the institution versus the indirect costs that aren't billed by the institution. So annual costs such as tuition, fees, books, room and board, and travel. And then they need a clear grouping of each type of aid offer. So they need to identify if the aid is a grant or scholarship, loan, or a work program. So financial aid that doesn't need to be paid back versus financial aid that does need to be paid back. And then what's the estimated net price? So what's left after accounting for the cost and aid, and what is the out-of-pocket expense? All right, so we've got a couple of examples. So this provides details of the cost of attendance. So it gives the all of the elements of the cost of attendance here. So the financial aid, and it also gives us the financial aid the student can expect to receive. So we've circled the total estimated cost of attendance. Again, that includes both direct and indirect costs. And then we also have our work study awards here. And so again, we need to we need to state that work study awards are not guaranteed of a job and usually does not apply to the student's account directly. So that would be in the form of a paycheck. So the student just needs to see if they have $4,000 of student employment um, uh, on that award notification, that they need to be aware of how those funds are going to what needs to be done to one, receive those funds and how those funds are going to be received. All right, let's look at another example. All right, so this example, the expenses are broken down to direct and indirect costs. So the direct costs are the tuition, fees, housing, and the indirect costs are the books, transportation, and miscellaneous expenses. So again, are what's going to be on the student's bill versus what's not going to be on the student's bill. And then this aid offer separates gift and self-help options as well. So there is a section for scholarships and grants, and then there is a section for loan and work options. And so this one also has eligible amounts, recommended amounts, and then the student can also accept the amounts within this award notification. Again, the student just needs to be aware of what the next steps are to accept awards and what they need to do to move forward with the institution. All right. So when a student and family are looking at these award notifications, what do they need to do? First, they need to isolate the cost of attendance as best as you can. So you want to look and see what are our tuition and fees, and we've highlighted here our tuition and fees, our housing and meal plans. So these are going to be our estimated billed charges. And so we need to know, what's going to be billed, what do we have to, what do we need to cover so the student can move forward. So that's step one. We need to look at our cost of attendance and determine what we need to cover. And step two is going to be we need to identify our scholarships and grants. So, what are the things that are going to reduce our costs and then things that are not going to be paid back? So, we want to utilize those first. So, we have highlighted here our scholarships and grants. So, what do we need what do we need to look at first, accept first? And then we can determine what our other options are to make sure that our bill is covered. All right, so step three is going to be factor in our federal loans and our federal work study. So again, what are our loan options and do we have any work study options as well? Again, there's $3,000 on this award notification. Is that coming in a paycheck? Is that going to be directly coming off the student's bill? Those are the questions you want to answer. Is the student going to work? We need to answer that first. Is the student going to actually pursue that option as well? And then that's to help determine what that net price is going to look like. All right. And then what our other options are there some credit-based loan options as well? Is there an optional Parent Plus or is there a private education loan that we need to look at? So, there are this award notification is giving us our optional Parent Plus information and private education loan information as well. And families need to be aware there are extra applications for these options as well. These are not guaranteed. And so there are extra steps and extra applications that need to happen before the student the student or parent would be eligible for additional awards there. All right. So we need to compare the net price, not the sticker price. So as an example here, so in the left-hand column, we have an institution, their cost of attendance is $38,412. And you're comparing it uh, to the second institution where their cost of attendance is $27,521. Okay, but that's not the full picture. That's the cost of attendance, that's the sticker price. And I was like, oh, well, the one on the right, that's the one that we're going to choose. That's the cheaper option for us. Well, look, we need to look further. What's the total aid package? So the institution on the left is going to offer a total aid package of 498. So that net price is actually it's actually it costs less to go to the institution with a higher cost of attendance. So again, we need to look at the net price. So that cost of attendance minus the aid package. What does that net price look like for us? OASFA does have a cost comparison worksheet. This is on our resource page. We encourage families to use this so they can get down to that net price. It allows them to compare institutions. It gives them those same tools that we were talking about. We need to isolate our costs. We need to look at our financial aid that's offered. What is our free aid versus our aid that we need to pay back, or our working options. And then it helps us compare and get down to that net price of, so that you can do a true comparison for institution by institution. All right. We're almost done there, guys. All right, OAS for resources. So we offer many resources on our website for counselors and for students and families to ensure that you all have the information needed to make good decisions as the student is looking for their next for higher education. So you can go, this will have a link to our page for high school and college access counselors. You have your own page on the OASFA website. And there you can request a financial aid night presenter. You can add yourself to the OASFA counselor database and receive important training and resource notifications. You can register for our webinars and workshops. And then we also have additional resource documents. So again, this presentation, not only the recording, but also the slide deck will be available on the website shortly. So additional resources that we have provided, we have an updated FAFSA priority deadline date information sheet. So we go out every year to Ohio colleges and ask them what their FAFSA priority deadline date is, and if they have additional deadlines that families need to be aware of. We have that cost and financial aid comparison worksheet that we just reviewed. We have a completion tool by high school. We have the FAFSA Ohio student record data. Again, because of the government shutdown, our data is a few weeks old, and we will have that updated as soon as we can receive new data. We have a financial aid toolkit. We have information for the Ohio Education and Training Voucher Program. We have information on State of Ohio grants and scholarships. We have information on student aid and identity theft, and so how students and families can protect themselves. We have the FAFSA prototype and the updates. We have links and recordings for previous webinars and trainings. We also have a financial aid night presentation that's been recorded, and many more resources, and including an entire page for students and families as well. And then if you could complete our counselor workshop survey. This way we have some good feedback um, on how we did, what we can provide in the future. We always like to make sure that we are meeting our counselors where they're at, and provide the information that is needed so you can best serve your students and their families. And then we do have some time for some questions. So did we have any questions from um, from the room from our question and answer sessions that we need to talk about?
We got a pretty limited number of questions. So please, if you have questions about anything that we presented today, or you have general financial aid questions, now's your chance to type that in the Q&A box, or we can even look at the chat at this point since we're done presenting. So type your questions in wherever, and Emily, Melanie, or I are happy to try and answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, we did have a request, Emily, to go back to the slide with the QR code for the Ohio programs.
Okay.
Okay, I will see what I can do about that. Let's see.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
There we go.
There we go.
So scan away, please, if you need that.
And again, we'll have the slide deck and the recording on the website. I'm hoping to have that up by this afternoon. So.
Melanie, are there any other questions coming in?
I do not see any other questions.
Okay.
That was our last one.
Okay. And if you do have questions or think of things not at the not obviously as we get ready to wrap this webinar up, we do have an email address for the outreach team. This is the folks from the outreach committee who are presenting to you today. So you can send an email to outreach, outreach at OASFAA, OASFAA.org. So if you think of questions anytime during the year and you want, a financial aid administrator to help answer the question, please feel free to send us an email at outreach@oasfa.org, and we will be happy to reply to those as those questions come in. If there are no additional questions, then we thank you for attending today. And please feel free to use our counselor resource page throughout the year. We will have that Financial Aid 201 webinar coming up in February. We will open registration for that at the beginning of January, and we'll send a notice out to our counselor database at that point in time. So we thank you for attending today. Hope you have a great day. And good luck this year with FAFSA. Help us break Ohio's record. Let's just see how big of an increase we can have this year by having more and more and more of our students complete the form, since it's easier and faster, and we're over the rocky years and now back into a smooth phase with the FAFSA. So thank you for being here.